Hey, I'm Curt Johnson, and I'm past president of Save the Sound.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very appreciative to be able to speak with you. Curt, I would love to start by talking a little bit about how Save the Sound came to be from your personal perspective. If you could tell me a little bit about what came before in the early days of Save the Sound.
Well, we actually started out as a couple of different groups that merged about 2000 or so. Connecticut Fund for the Environment. I was an attorney there, and Save the Sound was a separate organization. We merged together. I like to think of the two groups as having both sort of some legal firepower, some technical ability to restore rivers and coastal areas, and also some ability to mobilize neighbors and concerned people who just love Connecticut and Long Island Sound and where they live.
Nice. Um, And how long had you been? It was the Connecticut Fund for the Environment? I'm sorry. What was the group that you were an attorney with?
Yeah, Connecticut Fund for the Environment, right, was one of the originating groups, and that's where I started out as a staff attorney, right?
Had how much had an interest in the topic of the work of that organization drawn you to it versus this is a place where I got a job? Was it very purposeful that you worked with an
Oh,
organization like that to
yeah,
start?
yeah, it was extremely purposeful. Law was my second career. Um, I was a park ranger, urban park ranger in New Haven for a number of years, and also did construction and a variety of different things, and went back to law school and worked in the private. I was a private attorney for about 4.5 years or so. Realized that only about a quarter of my work was really, in my opinion, moving the environmental ball forward. So I very purposely sought out a public interest job, and really thankful for the work. And my interest really came, like many of us, from being a kid playing outside. I was lucky enough to grow up the son of a toolmaker, but unusual because my dad was able to buy literally a tiny cottage in a unusual community called Mansfield Grove down in East Haven. And I say that because I feel like that was so important. We were mostly kids of blue collar working people, but had a chance to be free and explore and swim and fish and net and do all the stuff that kids love to do at the shore and explore. And I had a mom who was a pretty avid birder. So, she just would say when she was looking out at the sound that every single moment is different, the water, the birds, the movement of the marsh, etc. So that was my inoculation, and it stuck with me my whole life.
Is there so I grew up in Connecticut. I moved away for a long time. I moved back to Connecticut, lived there for a dozen years. I currently don't live in Connecticut, which is partly why we're speaking this way over Zoom rather than in person.
Sure.
Um, and I was fortunate to have a very much outside existence as a kid as well. Much of my working life has been spent outside. I worked on boats for a long time. I do again now as well. But I have also found in my time in Connecticut how easy it is to fall out of that practice of appreciating and existing in the outside and recognizing my place in it and its impact on my life, if that makes sense. I wound up for
Sure.
stretches of time going home to car to building to car to home. And is there anything you can speak to in terms of how to keep that connection to the outside alive through a working life in
Well,
Connecticut?
yeah. I want to just say that there's so many beautiful places hidden away fairly close to us. And I think one of the silver linings, let me put it this way, of the pandemic was that we all explored our local neighborhoods. We were forced to, we really couldn't travel. And so people have found these small pocket areas, whether it's literally a pocket park down the street or whether it's in my neighborhood, there's a little hidden state park nearby, whether it's a walking trail. Uh, Connecticut has, plus we have 160 land trusts that all own small parcels of land all around the state.
Wow.
So most of us have the ability, at least within a bus ride, of finding a really beautiful place outdoors to kind of hang out in. And I'll also say one of the things that I'm pleased about since I was a kid is that it's really noticeable how much more individual sort of stewardship ethic there is. Places that I used to go that were pretty badly trashed are now, not that there isn't litter in Connecticut. I don't want to say that. We pick up, close to a ton of plastic crap out of the Farm River here every year, and Save the Sound does many, many, many tons. But the amount of litter and abuse is much lower than when I was a kid. I think there is a much higher consciousness now. So I think that might answer your question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Um, what can you talk a little bit about the time when the merging of the organizations into what Save the Sound is now? How did that impact the collective mission, or the ability of those organizations to kind of pursue their missions as one?
Well, I think that, when you bring different skill sets together, it can create a much stronger body than the separate pieces alone. And that's what happened for sure. Because Connecticut Fund for the Environment had really capable lawyers who were able to enforce, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act cases, which are so important and have been so important to the waters and the air that we breathe here in Connecticut. But also, Save the Sound had a program called Habitat Restoration. Is kind of a fancy word, but really what it means is the ability to find locations where nature's really been damaged, especially along rivers or the Sound, in ways to restore life, marshes, beaches, natural areas, and bring them back to life again. Because, what we know, I think just about everybody who's lived as long as I have has seen some place in Connecticut that was badly hurt many years ago, because we've lived here as, Europeans for 400 years and we've done a lot of damage. And you just allow that place to have the ability to restore itself, and it will. And the wildlife will come back and the fish will come back. And it happens really quite quickly. So that was another skill set that came into and was very complementary. And finally, Save the Sound was quite a bit better at organizing people and bringing people together and reaching out and gathering thousands of volunteers to, whether it was to clean up a river or to go up to Hartford or whatever it was, to make a change. So that was extremely important, that combination of skills.
Yeah. Bouncing around in time a little bit, I'd love to talk a little bit about the now, and as the perspective you have at this moment in time. Um, what are some aspects of the way climate change impacts those of us in our listening audience in Connecticut? You, us, our lives. At this moment in time, what is most on your mind, or some of the things that are, very much on your mind in terms of that impact as you can see it now?
Yeah, I think something that every listener needs to be concerned about is our experience over the last few years and its accelerating of extreme rain deluges and what they do to our rivers and to ourselves and to our basements and to being able to drive down the street. I'll give a couple of examples. It's just about exactly a year since the Naugatuck Valley was hit with, I think it was 10 or 11 inches of rain within about a 24-hour period. That simply um, didn't happen with any frequency when I was young. I'm 72 years old. So, back in the 60s, I just don't recall that at all. And, the impacts are still felt there. There's roads that are washed out. There's people's houses that have been destroyed. There's, a tremendous impact on the Naugatuck River system itself. We need to really focus a lot on how to create more natural sponges that are going to absorb that rainwater, whether it's a rain garden or it's a rain barrel or it's, a park like Meriden has put in the center of its city to absorb stormwater. But that's a major, major, major problem. The heat. Fortunately, we had a relatively cool summer, but we had about 3 weeks in July where it was really uncomfortable for a lot of folks. I'm feeling it more as I get older, the heat. I think young people and older people particularly feel it. It used to be that we didn't need air conditioning down on the Sound. Unfortunately, I'm starting to think that maybe our family does in the little tiny cottage we have. So that's a major impact. And I've personally observed the water levels rising here in Long Island Sound. When I was a little kid, my brother uh, put his glasses down on a rock in a certain location, and due to an accident that I don't need to talk about, they literally burnt up and they created a little pile of plastic there. So I know intimately well that location because I teased him about it for years, and that location was above the green tide line that you see on the rocks on Long Island Sound, probably by about a half a foot or now, and now it's at least a half a foot below that green line. So the water level in my little lifetime has risen very close to a foot. It's still continuing, and of course, when we have the big storms like we did 10 years ago, that just accelerates the amount of damage that we see here on the Sound. So those are just a few ways. Of course, the speed, something I'm less concerned about, but is definitely a reality, is the change in fish life that you see in the Sound. When I was a kid, my dad would take me fishing for winter flounder in March and April. We would come home with, a couple bucket loads. There's basically no winter flounder left.
Mm.
When I was a kid, there were very few fluke or summer flounder. Now they're extremely, strong in the Sound. The good news is that due to collective efforts, there's just about as much fish life in the Sound. They're just really different fish
Huh.
than when I was a kid. So that continues to move up the coast, and I think people aren't realizing how quickly that is happening up the coast. So yeah,
Yeah. Is the cottage that you're talking about, does your family still have the cottage in Mansfield Grove?
yeah, we do, and I have. I mean, it's I would say one of the things you were asking about, things I'm concerned about. One is certainly affordability, particularly on the shoreline. I mean, my dad was a tool maker.
Yeah.
My his best friend was a pipe fitter. My best friend down there's father was a plumber. We were a working class group of people on the Sound, and I just really concerned that the son of a working class kid now won't have that opportunity to experience nature in the way I did,
Right.
and it shouldn't be. I mean, that is part of the problem of our polarization is that working class people feel now that they're kept out. They're kept out of the ball game. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the ball game along with scores of other kids that I played with down there.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking to me to see that is no longer an opportunity. And that's just one tiny example of the bifurcation of society and the way that we stop talking with each other. One other thing I just want to say that you were asking about things that really concern me. Uh, you know, I think my biggest concern actually in terms of any kind of environmental and social action at this point is the erosion of our confidence, our collective confidence in being able to make collective change. And, I think if you ask the average person in Connecticut, there'd maybe be 1 in 20 that realize that due to their investment over a period of 25 years, we, um, you know, reduced the worst pollutant going into Long Island Sound by 70% by upgrading all the sewage treatment plants. Literally, I believe it's over, 70 of them around Long Island Sound in New York and Connecticut due to the confidence of the EPA, the confidence of our state agencies, the confidence of local people coming together and saying, I remember when there were porpoises on Long Island Sound. I remember when my father was, catching far more fish. I remember a time when fish weren't dying off the way they were in the late 80s and early 90s. And we invested. Every person I'm talking to who's over the age of, say, 30, you all invested a couple $1 billion in this effort. We believed in it, and it worked. It worked. The sound now is holding its own. Water clarity has improved. I can guarantee you, if we had not done that, we would be like Florida is right now, with big dead zones, with toxic algae blooms constantly. It was headed in that direction. We made that happen. But people, that success story, I mean, I feel like today, good news collective success stories could come up and hit people on the head and they wouldn't recognize it. We have lost confidence in each other. And unless we have confidence in each other, we are going to, as Mr. Franklin said, we're either going to hang together or we're going to hang separately during the Revolutionary War. We have to hang together. So that's maybe the most important thing I'm going to say today. This effort was involved, you know, upwards to $2 billion. The money was handled with great care and a lot of safeguards by the state of Connecticut, the state of New York, and the EPA. There were over 100 construction projects. There was not one report of fraud, of improper contracting, of political bullshit. It was a complete success story. But because you didn't read about it in the paper and the headlines, no one was aware of the great success. We need to tell these stories about how government did exactly what it set out to do, handled the money properly, used safeguards, and got the job done.
I mean, it sounds amazing, quite frankly. Like that, it was 70 different sewage plants around the area, all fell under that $2 billion umbrella, and
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
incredible. Obviously over 25 years, like that.
And it was
When that
federal
investment
money,
started.
it was state money, it was local money. Everybody had, skin in the game.
Yeah.
Uh, Yeah. But it starts with the vision and the confidence to make it happen.
Yeah. And you're right. It is cracked. Like that confidence is very much cracked and eroded. And I can recognize it over the course of my lifetime. Like I think there was I feel like I grew up, and part of this is perhaps the way my parents viewed their responsibility towards working with neighbors and folks in our town, but just I feel like I was able to grow up with taking that confidence for granted that we
Right.
are working collectively towards something.
Yeah.
Everybody has different ideas of what that something should be, but the folks on the different ends of the political spectrum in the town that I grew up in were still like calling each other up on the phone when one of them sent out a political mailing that annoyed the other side, and just like saying, "Hey," like it prompted conversation rather than burrowing further
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, as you were talking a bit about the combination of Connecticut Fund for the Environment and Save the Sound, and the way collective action of volunteers and extended neighbors, shall we say, with similar vision and a willingness or an ability to be wrangled into working together, and a strong legal arm that was able to pursue action in the courts, and how that worked for Save the Sound and to allow it to work better and stronger on multiple fronts. Can you speak a little bit to, like, do you see the role of those two sides that came together so well in Save the Sound? How do you see the role of those two aspects of our society, like working together, needing to be a part of us collectively moving forward in general at this point in time? Does that question make sense?
Sure. I mean, the question about uh, law
Mm-hmm.
and legal enforcement is such a critical one on every level as we speak. The the country, in many ways, was formed under the concept that no single person was above the law, that we were going to establish rules that would effectively keep us on the straight and narrow, right? Really rooted in a moral direction and sensibility about collective action, which evolved obviously over time, right? I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
civil rights movement and the laws that were passed were to correct a long failed system of moral behavior. The environmental laws were established in many parts to give voice to rivers and clean air and allow people. I mean, one of the most brilliant elements of the Republican administration that passed the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act was giving citizens the right to bring those actions to a federal judge and present evidence about pollution and hold the polluter to account. Um, these aren't radical ideas. These are ideas that really establish a moral direction for a country and a society and a neighborhood and a river that's based in collective wisdom. Um, so that's incredibly important. What's also critically important is, the investment in increasingly in the face of climate change and the changes that are happening within every river system and every coastal area in the country, especially in the East. I'm just going to stick with the East Coast for the moment, is an investment in restoring natural systems that protect people's houses, protect critical highways, railroads. I'll give you an example. We restored a a dune and river system down in eastern Connecticut at Rocky Neck State Park at Bride Brook. And that dune system during, I can't remember whether it's Irene or Sandy, maybe both, kept protected a bridge, a railroad bridge that could have easily been washed out,
Mm.
right? And it's the
Yeah.
railroad bridge for Amtrak that
Mm.
services tens of thousands of people a week. I don't know,
Yeah.
thousands a day. So it's this idea that nature can and has protected us, and we need to help her continue to protect us into the future. So these are, again, moral principles. Are we just going to say you're on your own? It gets pretty lonely when there's a disaster and people are destitute and they're told that they have to fend for themselves. That's a recipe for really human misery and a moral failure.
Yeah.
So the little parts that Save the Sound are doing are part of a much larger societal structure that keeps us whole.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, at this point, I'm not sure whether, I think you can, so as somebody who started out life being able to explore the outdoors and gain an appreciation for nature's role in your own life. I don't know whether the chronological perspective that I'm most interested in hearing about is was it how being the president of Save the Sound for a while gave you a window into uh, the collective, you know, biological existence of our region, or does it go back even farther and start when you were, an urban park ranger in New Haven? I guess you can choose the perspective window, but what is there anything that stands out to you that you were able to learn personally through your professional experience that has changed or impacted the way you view the world that we live in?
Hmm. Well, I suppose it's well, as my career advanced, I came to appreciate how important uh, group collective action was. Individual lawsuits are very powerful, but what's much more powerful is neighbors recognizing the problem and uh, going with the attorney to the leaders in that municipality or in that locality, in that neighborhood, and saying, this really means a lot to me personally. Whether it's in Darien where there were sewage overflows on a regular basis, and a group of Darien neighbors came with us to meet with the first selectman and said how they had personally observed the sewage and they wanted it stopped, and that these guys weren't just out of town nuts. They demanded action, and that had a tremendous impact on the first selectman, who then decided wisely to negotiate how to fix the problem as opposed to fighting us in court. So those kind of uh, relatively small groups can appeal to the better angels because no one goes uh, into political leadership for the money. There's headaches galore, and that group of citizens reminded that first selectman why they were elected to begin, why they wanted to be there to begin with. There was a fourth grade class that I worked with who got to know the head of the appropriations committee, and it was about uh, changing the law to protect water company lands so that our drinking water was pure. And they kept calling her. And finally, she came up to me towards the end of the session. He said, "These darn kids, they just won't leave me alone. I'm going to have to do this thing." Because she was a tough Paul. She was a tough Irish Paul who was a street fighter, but these kids reminded her of why she was there,
Yeah.
and she couldn't avoid it.
This is a big
You know,
street.
it's a big thing. So it's that collective action that's so important. And you were asking about me as a kid. I'll just tell this little story. When I was about 10 or 12 years old, this was the 60s. Uh, Across the river, there was a little tiny bay, and me and my friends went over with a little tiny dinghy, and we found like a ton of little cherry stone clams, and we just went nuts. And this is an instinct we all have because it's sort of an instinct that men and women, because we grew up as wild people without any guarantee of the next food. When you find like all these cherry stones, you just like start throwing them in the flood. So we filled up the whole pram. We brought it over to a local restaurant, sold it, maybe got $20 for it. We thought it was fantastic. And there's not a clam that has reestablished itself in that little bay since we cleaned them all out, which was a reminder to me of how delicate. Maybe I've been paying penance for all these years, right? What I'm saying is that we can have such a powerful impact, not meaning to. That's why we have to regulate ourselves and regulate each other and maintain a balance because Lord knows we've got all the power in the world to destroy this earth entirely. So, yeah.
Yeah. I know there are a couple more questions that I may ask before we wrap up. Before I do that, is there anything that we haven't yet spoken about that comes to your mind as something you want to make sure is a part of this conversation, or you want to bring
No,
into it?
no,
All right.
no.
Um, is there anything that you would be interested in hearing as a Connecticut resident and potential listener to, this series about the impact of climate on our lives and our impact on the climate? Is there anything you would be interested in hearing about in terms of stories that people might be sharing?
Well, I am interested in hearing about how people communicate to folks who in Connecticut who are living a different life than they are, right? A different experience, and uh, actual personal experiences related to that, and ask people, uh, how what they think about that or what their experiences have been. Um, I think that's so critical these days, how we talk. And, a lot of it has to do with our vocabulary. I think as we have become more and more politicized and more bifurcated across, class lines. Uh, People pick up almost immediately on our own bias, and the ability to actually communicate now is pretty fraught. So I'd be interested in that.
Yeah. Um, Curt, thank you so much for making the time to talk to me and to be a part of this project. It's been really wonderful to speak with you.
Well, it's great chatting with you, and I love your energy and I love your work. So thank you for doing it.
You're most welcome. Thank you very much.